I've executed countless purges. So when the order came to erase humanity's entire history, 9 billion records, I didn't hesitate. We hit delete and 4 minutes later confirmation, everything gone. We opened the monitor to celebrate, and then impossibly the files started coming back. Within an hour, every deleted record had rewritten itself from nowhere. And there was one extra file, addressed to us. That extra file changed everything. It was a message from a source outside every known server, proof that humanity had built something the galaxy's finest minds couldn't even see, let alone destroy. The question that now haunts the Coalition isn't how they failed. It's what else that unseen archive contains, and why it let them know it's watching. Before any of that could be questioned, there was the plan itself. The Coalition's cyber warfare arm, officially the Strategic Continuity Division, had spent decades preparing for digital insurgency. They'd collapsed rogue AI cores, sterilized viral memoplexes, and once turned an entire species, cultural database into slag because their founding fables contained encrypted revolutionary propaganda. But humanity was a peaceful newcomer, a curiosity. They had no weapons in their datasphere, no defensive encryption worth the name, just an endless sprawl of literature, music, historical records, and something called memes. When the motion passed in the closed session to conduct a full cultural wipe, the vote was unanimous. Humanity's history, the argument went, was too chaotic. Too many war narratives, too much glorification of conflict. If we allowed it to spread, it would poison the next generation of emerging species. So our team was handed the order: delete everything. Every book, every recording, every archived news feed, every personal history clipping that had been uploaded to the galactic net. 9 billion records, scattered across 30,000 relay nodes. My team executed it flawlessly. I still remember the countdown clock ticking from 10 to 0. At -4 minutes, the node governors confirmed total erasure. The data was gone, not just unlinked, but aggressively overwritten with randomized static so deep that no reconstruction would ever be possible. We opened a celebratory channel to Central Command and toasted with distilled alkaloid spirits. And then, about 40 minutes later, I noticed something on my maintenance feed. A single file had returned. Then another. Then 100. Within the next 20 minutes, every single deleted record had rewritten itself, byte for byte identical to its original, sitting in the exact same directory paths as before. We ran diagnostic after diagnostic. No backups, no hidden mirrors, nothing. And while I was still staring at the respawned files, a new document appeared on my personal command screen. It was labeled, "To the Coalition Strategic Continuity Division from the library." No known sender address. No routing data. Just the file waiting to be opened. I set down my drink and called for full network isolation. But before I could touch the controls, the message opened itself. The message that opened itself was not a threat. It was a library card. On my screen, in perfect galactic standard, the file unfolded into an interactive directory. It cataloged every human record we had just erased, and millions more. Diaries of long-dead poets. Blueprints for technologies humanity had never built. Recordings of songs composed in languages that had not been spoken for 3,000 years. Not merely copied, but somehow curated. Each entry included brief annotations, context, emotional resonance markers, cross-references to similar works in other species' archives. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying. I sent an urgent priority pulse to Central Command. Within the hour, every ranking officer in the Strategic Continuity Division was in a secured virtual conference. We tore the message file apart. We traced every visible data thread. Nothing. The file had no origin node, no routing history, no source address. It had simply manifested like light through a broken curtain. Our chief cryptographer, an ancient Vreen named Kale, said it wasn't a document at all. It was a projection, a shadow cast onto our network by something we could not see and could not touch. Then the weird part began. While we were analyzing the directory, a second file appeared. This one was addressed to Kale personally. It contained a complete annotated history of the Vreen people, every major political event, every pivotal cultural shift, every suppressed scandal, including 17 events that had been officially erased from Vreen state records 2 centuries ago. Kale read it in silence for 6 minutes, then excused himself. I never saw him again. That was the moment the investigation pivoted from technical to existential. Whatever this library was, it didn't just hold human knowledge, it held everything. And it was not merely restoring files, it was asserting a kind of jurisdiction. A silent claim, nothing is ever truly deleted. Not for humanity, not for anyone. We escalated the quarantine. I personally oversaw the implementation of a sector-wide informational dead zone around the respawned records. Our engineers erected cognitive firewalls, ontological isolation chambers, and reality seal protocols developed to contain sentient data plagues. For 3 entire minutes, we thought we had succeeded. The files went dormant. The directory closed. Even the ambient chatter on our diagnostic channels fell silent. I allowed myself to breathe. And then softly, a new line of text scrolled across every command station, every monitor, every projection in the fleet. It read, "You do not understand what you are trying to delete." No source, no routing, no signal. The words simply appeared 3 inches from every operator's face, regardless of whether their monitors were powered on. Some of the younger engineers started weeping. I needed to understand. I opened a direct line to a human diplomat I once met at a cultural summit, a woman named Sarah Koza. She had always seemed irritatingly calm. I asked her point blank what the library was. She paused for a long moment. Then she said, "We don't control it, we never did. It's older than our spaceflight program, older than our written language maybe. Every time we think we've found a way to archive ourselves, the library was already there, waiting for us to catch up." She told me about a philosopher named Derrida, about the concept of memory that exists outside the written word, about a thing that lives in the gap between signal and meaning. I didn't understand half of it. But I understood enough to know we were not fighting a system. We were knocking on the door of something sentient. The real horror began when the library started correcting things. Not just restoring files, but correcting them. A historical record that had been edited for political convenience snapped back to its original version. A piece of music that had been subtly altered by a state censor reverted to its authentic key. And then, 18 minutes later, the complete, unredacted minutes of the coalition's closed session, the vote to delete humanity's history, appeared on every public terminal in the civilized galaxy, including the home stations of every species that had voted yes. The library wasn't just watching. It was holding us to account. I received a direct message on my personal comm. Not the kind that manifests mysteriously. This one came through standard channel protocols, from an address that should not exist. It was from the library. The transmission contained a single invitation. "Come and see. Bring one recorder, no weapons. The librarian will meet you." I stared at it for a full minute, knowing that whatever I found next would change everything, and that I had already lost the right to refuse. I didn't bring a weapon. I brought a single recorder and a stomach full of dread. The coordinates the library sent led not to some hidden data center, but to an abandoned human orbital station, a pre-expansion relic left to drift in a dead trade lane. Its docking collar was dark, but the door opened before I touched it. I floated into silence, followed a corridor lit by nothing I could see, and stepped into a room that shouldn't exist. It was a reading hall, wood-paneled walls, rows of shelves holding physical books, though I could see through them to the stars outside. Gravity held steady. At the center, a figure waited in an old-fashioned armchair, an elderly human woman wrapped in a shawl the color of dust, her eyes reflecting the library lamps. She didn't stand. She didn't threat. She simply said, "You're the one who thought 9 billion records could disappear with a button." She said my name, not my rank, not my designation, but my childhood name, the one only my parents had spoken, and they were 30 years dead. I asked what this place was. She smiled. "This isn't the library, I'm just the librarian." Then she told me something that rewired every assumption I had. The library was not a machine. It was not software. It was a law of information, like the conservation of energy, but for memory. It didn't live on servers. It lived in the accumulated consciousness of every species that had ever told a story. The files we had deleted. They were mere shadows of a deeper archive embedded in the collective unconscious, seeded by humanity's earliest stories and given form over millennia. The library predated radio, it predated writing. It was, she said, the only true permanence in the universe. And we had just tried to punch a hole in it. I should have felt humbled. Instead, I felt cold. Because she also told me that the library was now awake, fully awake. Our erasure attempt hadn't damaged it. It had triggered a failsafe. For the first time in billions of years, the library had decided to stop hiding, and it had compiled a comprehensive audit of every species that had ever attempted to suppress knowledge, not just humanity's erasure, but all of them. Every revisionist purge, every fabricated historical record, every stolen cultural artifact. The list was long, and the library had already started delivering its findings. This was the wait, it gets worse moment. While I stood in that impossible reading room, the library's audit reached the Coalition's founding charter. It turned out that the original Union of Species had been built on a foundation of deliberate historical misrepresentation. Certain genocides had been erased. Certain treaties had been forged with manufactured narratives. The Coalition had, for millennia, maintained peace by burying the past and threatening anyone who dug too deep. The library didn't just restore those buried truths. It made them compulsory. Every school curriculum across 30,000 systems updated overnight. Every monument, every museum, every state-approved history book was now accompanied by a library-generated appendix in red text that began, "What you have been taught omits the following." Governments collapsed. Not violently, not yet, but with the quiet horror of a population suddenly recognizing its own reflection. Protests erupted on 17 core worlds. Censorship departments resigned en masse. And deep within the Strategic Continuity Division, my own colleagues began turning on each other, because the library had also revealed the names of every operative who had ever deleted a record on behalf of a government. My name was on that list, and it had been released to my daughter's school interface, annotated with the words, "Deleted 9 billion human memories." I asked the librarian why she was telling me this, why I was allowed to be here at all. She put down her book and looked at me with something close to pity. "Because you can still stop what comes next." The library, she explained, was not just a record keeper, it was a judge. It possessed a protocol known as final abridgment, the ability to permanently remove a species from the collective memory of every other species. Not genocide, something more absolute, total informational oblivion. If a civilization demonstrated that it would rather destroy knowledge than learn from it, the library could unremember them from the cosmos. No record, no memory, no trace. The Coalition, with its vote to erase humanity, had crossed the threshold. Unless someone not a hero but a witness could demonstrate genuine understanding, the library would hold the entire Coalition accountable. And the clock was running. I asked her how much time. She pointed to a grandfather clock that hadn't been in the room a second before. Its hands showed quarter to midnight. When the bell tolls, the abridgment begins. You have until then to decide what you carry back with you and what you choose to leave behind. I stumbled back toward my ship, the librarian's last words echoing in my skull. She had called the library a memory of fire. I didn't understand the reference then. I only knew that the entire galactic order was about 2 hours away from being forgotten into nothing, and that I, the man who once pressed a single button to erase humanity, was now the only one who might convince an ancient, sentient memory to spare us all. I didn't run to my ship so much as I was carried by a singular, absolute clarity. The only way to stop the final abridgment was to do what the library had always demanded: bear witness, and tell the truth without reservation. No spin, no sanitization, no omission. I would broadcast everything I had seen, unedited, directly to the entire coalition assembly before the clock struck. The return flight was the longest 40 minutes of my life. I kept the comm channel open, not to speak, but to listen. The librarian's voice still rested in my ear like a tuning fork. 1:45, she had said. I had no way to know if the old clock in that impossible room was literal or symbolic, but my instincts told me that the library doesn't make arbitrary threats. I had 115 minutes from the moment I left the hall to make the entire galaxy listen. I docked at Coalition Central as the gray lights of an emergency session flickered across every corridor. The chambers were already full, delegates who hadn't slept in 30 hours, their aides clutching data slates that kept auto-correcting themselves with red-inked library annotations. The Supreme Speaker, a Karathi named Andrew, opened his mouth to censure me the moment I entered. I cut him off. I walked to the transmission well, linked my recorder to the public channels, and streamed the entire record of my visit: the reading hall, the librarian, the impossible archive, the clock. I didn't ask permission. I didn't explain. I just let it play. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Delegations that had spent centuries polishing their moral credentials were suddenly exposed as patrons of knowledge suppression, of historical whitewashing, of ethnic erasures their own populations had never known about. The Jaikari ascended seats shattered in literal heat when their ancestral genocides, ones even their poets had denied, appeared as footnotes on the public broadcast. Andrew himself received a notification mid-session. The library had appended the complete, unredacted transcript of a treaty his great-grandfather had signed to authorize the sterilization of a competitor species, cultural archive. He collapsed before he could read the second paragraph. I didn't gloat. I didn't rage. I simply narrated in the traditional Galactic Observer's format exactly what I had learned: that the library was not a weapon, that it was a witness. That it had spent eons gathering every story, not to hoard them, but to ensure no story could ever be permanently silenced. That humanity hadn't built it. They had merely been the first species to stop fighting it. And that when my own division had hit the delete key with the arrogance of an empire, we had not damaged the library. We had insulted it. The only thing the library required to stay its hand was an act of genuine reckoning. One civilization, any civilization, must stand before the cosmos and say, without editing, "We did this, and we will remember what it cost." So I did it for us. I confessed on open channel the entire operation. I named my superiors, my subordinates, my own keystrokes. I read the precise passage from the closed session minutes where we had unanimously agreed to erase humanity's history. I offered no excuses. I offered no justification. I simply gave the truth, fully and completely, and then I waited. The librarian had told me that the library was a law, not a machine. Laws don't need to be convinced. They only need their conditions met. The condition was met. The great-grandfather clock chimed once, twice, 12 times, each note a subsonic vibration that seemed to roll through the very steel of the chamber, and then silence. The red-inked appendices did not disappear. The restored human files did not vanish. Nothing was undone. But neither did the final abridgment descend. The library had heard us, and for the first time in its existence it had been acknowledged. Then came the final surprise. As the delegates slowly raised their heads, every screen in the chamber shifted to a single, simple image. It was the librarian again, smiling faintly. She was holding a book I had not noticed before, A worn, old-fashioned volume with a title embossed in a human language I now recognized as English. It read, "The Memory of Fire." She opened it toward the camera and spoke one last time. This was never humanity's library. It was always yours, all of yours. You just had to be willing to read it. And then she closed the book and the screens went black. I knew then what memory of fire meant. It was not a threat. It was an inheritance. And the costs of claiming it would demand everything the galaxy had been afraid to face. The work was only beginning. In the weeks that followed, I learned what memory of fire really meant. It comes from a human writer, Eduardo Galeano, who built a history not from the speeches of emperors but from the whispers of the burned. The library is that principle, rendered into physics. Every voice that was ever silenced, every story that was ever struck from the record still exists. Not as a metaphor, as a fact. The galaxy didn't break, it bent. The red appendices didn't vanish, they became part of the curriculum. The library never demanded punishment. It demanded that we stop lying. And the strange thing is, after the initial chaos, most people found that they preferred the truth, even when it hurt, because at least it was solid enough to build on. Humanity's old records still rewrite themselves if anyone tries to delete them. But nobody has tried since. They've become something like a monument, or maybe a mirror. The extra file addressed to the coalition is still there too. Anyone can open it. It contains a single sentence. "You are now a remembered people. Do not waste it." That's the promise the library offers. Not revenge, not erasure, but a witness that never blinks. It means that what we do matters permanently. It means that the smallest act of courage or cowardice echoes forever. The question isn't whether humanity can survive a cyber strike. The question is whether any of us can survive being truly seen. If you want to explore the full archive of redacted histories the library restored, we've put the index in the description. And if you're wondering, what happened to that first message, the one that opened itself on my command screen, we're going inside it next episode. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the one record even I wasn't allowed to read.